Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm just relaxing on the porch here at home. Got back from Virginia yesterday. We had the Bugs Island Bassmaster Open out there, which was an absolute doozy for me. I did terrible. I had a really bad event. Really have put myself in a difficult spot for an Elite Series berth, but also learned a lot. You know, you tend to learn a lot from tournaments where you do real badly in. You know, I ended up finishing 163rd, the worst open I think I've ever had. I'll have to look back at some history way back in the day to see if I've got a worse finish. But you know, and the thing is that usually if you catch two limits, you don't finish in the 160 somethings. You know, in tournaments, usually that only happens when you've got two. You know, or you know, one day where you didn't catch a limit, or both days where you didn't catch a limit. But I caught a limit. I just never caught any big fish. So that's kind of frustrating for me too, is the fact that I feel like I did my job on one end, but just never was able to get a good solid bite. But after saying that comment, it 100% was the decisions I made, 100%, my fault, that I didn't do well. And I recognize that. There's nothing that externally happened. I didn't have any mechanical failures, no tackle failures, no issues that were outside of my control. It was basically a bad practice period issue when it came to this tournament. So I just wanted to kind of discuss some of the things that I've learned now that I've had a little bit of time to reflect. Sitting up here and hanging out with Doppler over there, really good place to kind of sit and look back on the last week and what I could have done better. So the first thing that I want to mention that I think was kind of the biggest lesson is that, and this is something I've known for a very, very long time, but practice is the most important part of tournament fishing. It is what really sets you up for success. Of course, there's a lot that goes on in the tournament that requires good fluid decision making, and sometimes you got to throw out your entire practice when it comes to the tournament day. But still, practice really sets you up and helps you kind of get an understanding for what's going on and what part of the lake that you want to fish. And I was just reminded of how important practice truly is in this tournament, because I feel like I ended up practicing a little bit too outside of my lane. Okay, so that's the first thing, is the fact that I really tried to do a lot offshore. Fishing, there's a lot of guys that were on a pattern where they're running points with stumps and using live scope to find these fish. A lot of them were fry garters or fish that were actively spawning on stumps and rock. And I really tried to duplicate that and go out there and find it while there was a good shallow bite going on. I mean, in fact, it wasn't a good shallow bite, but there was a shallow bite going on, which is my wheelhouse. That is my lane. And instead of focusing on staying in my lane until I figure it out to the best of my ability up shallow, I started going out and trying some different things that aren't necessarily in my wheelhouse that much. But I'm not saying that I don't feel like I should have tried those things. I think it's really important to try a lot of different things and be very creative during practice. But first, you have to nail down your strengths. If you don't dial in what are your strengths may not equate to what the deal is on a lake, but you can almost certainly find a certain area or a certain region of the lake or a certain type of cover that is going to allow you to fish your strengths. And so what happened at Bugs Island that I think was really unfortunate, and the reason why I didn't do well is number one, flipping and pitching is my biggest strength. And so when I was going to Bugs Island, I was really hoping that the water would rise and flood those bushes, and we would have a good bush flipping bite. That ended up happening. We ended up having a lot of water. It hadn't been that high in over a year on Bugs Island, and we had the perfect conditions, exactly what I was hoping for. And so what I did was I practiced, quite a bit. I flipped quite a bit, but I didn't flip everywhere on the lake. I just flipped in some areas that looked the best to me. So from my experience, fishing the stain water, the dirtier water regions of the lake, I did that and really just didn't get many bites at all. In fact, I never actually was able to visually see a flipping fish. I tried setting the hook on the one bite that I got, I think, in practice flipping, and never even got to see it. So I completely wrote it off for the entire lake instead of going around the entire lake. Because the conditions are perfect, I need to eliminate the entire lake on my strengths first, which I could have done in a 2-day period. Realistically, I could have just gone around the entire lake, pick some key areas in each region, flipped and eliminated that pattern. If it wasn't happening, I could figure that out fairly quickly. But instead, what I did was just fish a couple areas, and just because I wasn't doing well there, I wrote it completely off. And then what happens? I have guys that I respect highly as great flippers. They end up getting on the deal, which is essentially very, very small areas where, on the lower end of the lake, where they would get into a flurry. They might flip for a long time, but then all of a sudden they find an area where they catch a bunch, which is so typical with the flipping bite, because, if you're flipping a grass line, that there's always certain stretches that are holding the fish. So it only makes sense that bushes are the same. Bushes are always going to be the same. All types of cover are exactly the same type scenario. It was just way more accelerated at Bugs Island, where you could go literally miles and never get a bite flipping, but then you would find a group of fish in one certain area. And it seemed like the lower end of the lake was producing the best, which happened to be the clearer water on Bugs Island. And guys did better down there on the lower end flipping. So that was a big lesson that I had to learn as well, is not to avoid clear water for flipping. Not ultra clear water. Because of the wind and the high water, it was still stained. And so because we had like 4 feet in the bushes, 4 or 5 feet in the bushes, even though it had 2 foot of water clarity, it still was plenty stained enough for a good flipping bite, or just fishing shallow in general. And so I completely avoided the bottom end of the lake for those techniques, because I feel more comfortable in dirty water for flipping. But for some reason, the upper reaches of the lake were not the deal. They were not producing. So had I been more open-minded and realized that man, I really need to try it on the lower end of the lake, I probably would have done a whole lot better in this tournament. So that's another thing that I really learned this week, is don't avoid the more clear parts of a lake for a flip and bite or a shallow bite. And the funny thing is, once I look back on practice, I actually started down in the Nutbush Creek area, which is a very, very prominent, very clear water region of the lake. It's very close to the dam. And that actually was my best numbers day during practice. It was the first day, but because I felt like I felt more comfortable in other parts of the lake, I really forgot about the fact that I was catching more fish down Nutbush than up the lake. I just was like, I feel more comfortable doing my flipping fishing routine and all that up the lake, and so I kind of just made my way up lake and never came back. I ended up fishing areas like Grassy and around the ramp, which were pretty dirty. Another thing that I learned was that you don't necessarily need to avoid colder water relative to the rest of the lake. So, I learned this, the first day of the tournament, I actually only had 3 fish, like literally 10 minutes to weigh in. I had 3 fish in the well, and ended up picking up a Z-Man sling blade spinnerbait, and went into the short pocket near the ramp and ended up catching my final 2 keepers. The water there was very, very dirty. It was the water that had been, that came down the river during the flood conditions that we had, the rain that we had. And so it was all that muddy water from up the lake, that cold, muddy water that was coming down from the bottom of, I think, Smith Mountain Lake is the lake that it comes from. But anyways, it's cold, muddy water coming down the system, and it was about 5 or 6 degrees colder near the ramp than it was, in places like Grassy and where I was fishing the first day. And so I had avoided it during practice, but that final 10 minutes showed me, hey, these fish are ready to bite. Even though that it's colder water and dirtier water, I shouldn't be avoiding it. It was only like 60 to 61 degrees in that water there, versus like 64 to 66 degrees other places, but the fish were still biting. So obviously you don't really want to, I wouldn't say that cold, muddy water is something that you want to focus on, but if it's still around the spawning range of temperatures and above, muddy water is not something that you need to worry about. And relatively cold water is not necessarily something to write off either. So like if one region of the lake is 66 degrees and another one is 61, doesn't necessarily mean the 61 degree one is going to be any worse. That being said, I focused on that colder water the second day. It caught a lot of fish, caught my limit early, but no big ones, obviously. And then the final thing that I learned this week, totally a mistake that I made unwittingly, was that Bass has a different rule as far as check-in and as far as punching that clock at the end of the day than MLF. So I ended up getting a 1-minute penalty because I didn't understand that rule, and it is my responsibility to understand all of the rules. So completely my fault. I take full credit for it, and I apologize to my co-angler for getting a 1-pound penalty, especially my co-angler. I was already in the weeds. I was already way down there in the standings. It would have still got me an extra 10 spots or something, 10 points, which hopefully at the end of the season I'm not regretting. But anyways, I ended up, so at MLF, essentially it was once you come off pad in that no wake zone that you're around the launch, when you come off pad near the check-in boat, you actually are pretty much, you're punching that clock. You are checked in, not necessarily checked in, because you got to still put the fob in the net and give him your number, but he recognizes that you have got off pad and that you're idling to check in, and that is your time. So you've made it on time. Bassmaster rules state that you have to put the fob in the net to actually punch that clock and to stop the clock for the day for you. And unfortunately, I got in on time, under MLF rules, and lackadaisically idled to the dock to check in, and ended up being 30 seconds late to check in because I didn't get the fob in the net. So that was another thing that I learned. Obviously, that is not something that is going to help you in a tournament on Bugs Island specifically, but if you do fish Bassmaster events and you also fish MLF events, it may help you not make the same mistake. So, but that was kind of a bummer. It was a surprise when I went to weigh my fish in, and but it's completely my fault. But anyways, guys, it was a week just cram-packed with very valuable lessons. the odd thing is I feel like I fished pretty good at this event. As far as what I had in the areas that I picked, I feel like I was fishing really good and fishing. And I hate to say it this way, because when I say it, it's like, obviously I did not fish good because I didn't finish well. But there are tournaments that I've had where I did poorly because I wasn't fishing good. I was fishing panicked. I was not fishing with focus and intensity. I was making terrible decisions that I was completely out of my lane during the tournament. That just did not happen at Bugs Island. Like, I picked an area that I thought would be the best opportunity for me to just put the trolling motor down and pick it apart and get 5 quality bites in a day. And unfortunately, that region of the lake was not on hardly at all. There was maybe 1 or 2 guys that did decent in that region of the lake, but all the rest of the guys, good fishermen, did terrible and caught little fish just like me. And so, I feel like I failed in practice. That was kind of the main thing that I kind of took from this. Because during the tournament, if I had put myself in the right areas, I was firing all the cylinders, man. I was really doing well. And in fact, the first day, I didn't have my first fish, I had 1 fish at like 9 or 10 o'clock. And I was confident and focused and fishing clean all the way up until about 3 o'clock. I had a 5 o'clock weigh-in, and at 3 o'clock, I'm like, this day sucks. This is not working for me. So, like, I fished very, very, well, I think. You just feel when you're fishing good or you're not fishing good. I felt like I was fishing good, and it still just didn't work out this time. So what can you do but learn from your mistakes, move forward, apply them to the next situation that those lessons kind of work for you, and the next time I go to Bugs Island, we're not doing the same mistakes. We're not making those mistakes. But anyways, guys, those are just some thoughts from the recent event. Hopefully they help you in your next event. I really do hope that they do. And I appreciate all the support after a tough tournament. And also, make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe button, and also share these videos. And if you have any questions, make sure you drop a comment below with your question that you want me to do a video on. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Trust the process, and I'm going to see you out on the water. Take care.